Okay, welcome everybody. It looks like it's just about 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I'm sure we'll have more participants join as we go. Thanks so much for joining on a pretty day. This is the Citizen Science and Invasive Plants webinar. My name is Dana Bookbinder, and I'm Citizen Science Coordinator with EcoSpark. And we're joining today with York Region. The York Regional Forest is an exciting spot to visit, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. And if you have any questions as we go, please participate by typing into the chat feature. You should all be muted, so you won't be able to speak during the webinar. But we have a few people following the chat, and we're hoping to respond there to any questions. And then at the end, we'll open up for any questions more broadly, and you can unmute to ask them at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions about the Zoom platform, you can type them into the chat feature as well, and we'll try and get that all sorted out. Once again, we are recording this webinar, so it will be posted and publicly available as soon as tomorrow. And we will be sharing resources as we go, so you don't have to jot down notes. If there's websites that you want to take a look at, we'll try and put them into the chat feature as well, and then share them by email afterwards, along with the link for the webinar recording. Okay, well, we'll just dive right in here. Again, my name is Dana Bookbinder, and I'm from EcoSpark. We're an environmental charity that empowers people to take an active role in protecting and sustaining their local environment. I have to say it's a lot of fun working for EcoSpark, and even working from home now, we're really trying to give people the tools for education, monitoring, and influencing positive change. We're based in the Greater Toronto area, but I think there's a lot of overlap for other areas, and the tools that we're going to talk about here are quite universal, as well as the invasive species, unfortunately. So thank you for joining us today. A brief overview of some of the programs that we have across EcoSpark. Our Changing Currents program is probably the best known, and that allows students in grades 6 through 12 to get hands-on experience in environmental monitoring. That's with stream studies, so the students actually put on waders and look at the little critters called benthic macroinvertebrates that are in our local streams to assess water quality. And that's real data. We're actually one of the major contributors to the Ontario Benthic Biomonitoring Network with all of that student-generated data. So it's really exciting for the research as well. We have citizen science programs for all ages and backgrounds across Southern Ontario in school grounds, in parks, and with community groups and corporate volunteering groups. And we have a program called Greenbelt Youth Ambassadors that we're recruiting right now, actually. Any youth volunteers in your life who you think might be interested in gaining some environmental leadership skills, you can contact us right at the end of this webinar. We'll have some information about contact. So let us know if anyone that you know would be interested in that program. There's a lot of remote activities going on right now, and then eventually we'll do more in-person bus tours and that kind of thing to learn about our ecosystem support services around the Greenbelt. And if you're just joining us, we're talking today about invasive species and citizen science techniques to help out with the invasive species issues. We're partnering with York Regional Forest, so just a brief introduction to that, because it's kind of a special place, or places. It's actually comprised of 23 forest tracts across York Region, with over 140 kilometers of trails, including accessible trails in 3 tracts. I had the opportunity, I have 2 little boys, and we took them to one of the accessible trails on the Hollage tract in York Regional Forest a few weeks ago. And we could even push the stroller and get right into the woods. So that was special for them to be able to see the earliest wildflowers coming out this year. It is open to the public 365 days per year with no cost to enter. And it was the first public forest to be FSC certified in Canada. So the Forest Stewardship Council gave it this designation in 2001, indicating environmental responsibility. 600,000 visitors annually come to the York Regional Forest. And so there's that forest education piece, a big focus on forest education and a lot of great resources there. It has reopened with public access now, but there are stricter rules for all users. So please stay tuned to updates at york.ca/YRF. And we'll go ahead and share that in the chat. So if you haven't opened your chat feature yet, on the black toolbar for Zoom, there should be a button that says chat. If you click that, that's where you can be typing to us, and we'll be sharing some resources as we go if you're interested in learning more. We're talking about citizen science, which is a broad term. Today we're really focused on environmental monitoring for citizen science. So first of all, the word citizen here really means a citizen of the world. It's an inclusive idea, studying nearby nature together. There's a whole host of free tools that anybody has access to, and then the data is also available for anybody to explore. A really important part of that is homegrown inquiry. So science at a very basic democratic level of what are your questions about the world around you? How can we use this kind of inquiry to help solve local and global problems together? And I think environmental monitoring is something really fun and important that we can do right now, including from home. So you can be watching for wildlife in nearby nature, whether it's backyard patio or if you see some of this garlic mustard, one of the invasive species we're going to talk to, then you can flag that in your community and on hikes in more natural areas. The basic idea behind citizen science for environmental monitoring is to collect and submit data. So what does that mean? Maybe you're not a botanist. I don't have professional botany training either, but I can snap a photo of something that I think looks neat or interesting, or maybe I've heard about in a webinar, and share that with some of these online databases. So we'll talk about EDDMapS today and iNaturalist, along with the Seek app. So these are a few citizen science tools where you can submit these observations. It could be a photo, it could just be a description of what you see, and all you need is where you saw it and when you saw it. So that becomes really important data when you have that happening all over York region, all over the world. You've got more complete data sets than any research team could ever hope to achieve, just because of the numbers of participants and the eyes on the ground with people participating in this way. If you're not familiar with invasive species, just a really brief definition here. It is important, it's got two different parts in the definition. So it's a non-native species. It could be a plant or another organism that's introduced from another geographic region. But it also has a second part in the definition that its introduction or spread negatively impacts native biodiversity, the economy, and or society, including human health. So there's that impact piece that's really important. We're not just talking about introduced species that are harmless. We're talking about the ones that are causing problems today. And I think we have a link to share there if you want to find out more information. We're going to be referring people to something called the best management practices for each invasive species that we discussed today, and there's also EDDMapS Ontario, which has like a whole library of resources about these invasives we're talking about and all of the other ones in Ontario, so you can learn more. I'm just going to pause there and check in with Holly Campbell, who's our environmental education coordinator. Is the chat feature working okay?
Everything seems to be working well.
Okay, great. Again, if you do have questions, go ahead and ask in the chat feature so that we can be sure everybody's on board and following along here. Thanks, Holly. We'll get back to you later. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about invasive species management overall. Ontario has prohibited and restricted a number of invasive species that pose a risk to the natural environment, and there's information about that in the Invasive Species Act, which is used to prevent and control their spread. There are also federal invasive species rules, and we have, again, those links if you want to learn more about the topic overall. I think it's an important point. But we really want to focus on what you can do. So what can we all do as citizen scientists to help with this issue? First of all, reporting is really the #1 thing. Reporting any invasive plant as you encounter it can be hugely helpful to flag it for local community members, for land managers, and just to help us and researchers everywhere understand the spread of these and prevent them. So thinking about even predicting where they might move next and be able to protect the biodiversity in those locations. Again, the things that you would report would be the location, the date, so we can track some of the changes over time, the extent of the infestation, how much you're seeing. Is it like one plant or miles and miles, kilometers and kilometers? Sorry, my American coming out there. And you can help map the spread. So the whole point of reporting is to try and get an image of where these are located. In addition, we're going to talk about a couple tools to help you monitor native species and learn more about like our beautiful monarchs and the plants that support our pollinators and other wildlife. So that's a really important piece as well, and fun for kids too. We've got some options for families. Another thing that I think is important and overlooked is just to learn more. So by joining this webinar, thank you so much. You're demonstrating that you're interested, and I think that's an important message to get out, that people care. And we have a way to spread the word about what we do know with invasive species. So we're going to try a poll. This is my first attempt at a poll with Zoom, so bear with me here. You're going to have a chance to participate by letting us know how familiar are you already with the invasive plant called garlic mustard. So this should pop up. Looks like we're getting some responses already across the spectrum. Wonderful. So if you didn't get to see the poll, all it is it's asking how familiar are you? Have you never heard of it? I've heard about it, but couldn't ID it yet. Hopefully after this webinar you will. Could recognize it outside. That's sort of the next step. And we'll talk about how this is a great week to be doing that because it is flowering now. And are you very familiar with this species? Are you an expert or professional? Wonderful. Okay, so the results have come in. That was very fast and effective. 87% of you have voted, so thank you for taking the time to do that. Wonderful, we have some people here who are familiar with the species or even expert level. And I would encourage you, if you do have information to share about this, you can use the chat feature and see if people have questions that come up. Go ahead and type back. We're all interested in learning from each other and sharing that expertise around. If you've never heard about it, don't worry. We're gonna chat about it right now. Thanks for doing that. I'm gonna end the poll now. Okay, I'm clicking on share results. There, you can see. Very nice. Most people are very familiar. Wonderful. Okay. So as many of you know and could recognize now, I'm going to challenge you to identify if there's first or second year growth in this photograph. For garlic mustard, Aliaria petiolata, just letting you know its history very briefly. It came from Europe as a food plant. It was planted in Ontario gardens, the first one in Toronto in 1879, and it leapt over the garden gate and kind of never came back. It's been spreading rapidly ever since. Thanks to actually some really cool biology. If you're into botany, invasive plants are the way to go because they've got absolutely fascinating features that make them so interesting and also so hard to deal with. Garlic mustard disrupts our native soil fungi with allelopathic chemicals that disrupt that soil chemistry. and that helps choke out native plants. So it has dense growth, but it's also fundamentally disrupting the soil structure for our native plants and tree species. It can be found everywhere. It's a woodland species. Of where we're concerned about it is in the woods, because it's affecting our native wildflowers and trees, but it also has been known to be a nuisance on farms. For example, dairy farms have issues where the cattle consume the garlic mustard and then their milk tastes garlicky and they can't use the milk anymore. So like far-ranging impacts. It's a threat to gardens because it hosts garden pests, and of course can choke out garden plants as well. And then I'll just say that it can affect forest health in a lasting way. So even if you have a successful removal program, you can expect to see changes in the soil chemistry for some time after the garlic mustard is removed. And we'll talk about its seeds in a moment as well. And it's displaced species at risk in Ontario. I was learning about American ginseng, drooping trillium, hoary mountain mint, and wood poppy are all species at risk that unfortunately this plant has been shown to impact. So how do you identify it? How would you be able to flag this for land managers or maybe notice it in your own garden? And I will say most of the photos in this presentation I took this week in about a 10-minute walk around the block in Toronto. So it's growing in urban spaces as well. And it's everywhere. When you start looking for it, you'll really not have trouble finding it. So it's an herb type plant. There are white flower clusters, and it's blooming right now where I am. It's blooming in May. It has 4 petals on each of the white flowers, and those will eventually turn into long green seed pods. So like almost like a little bean pod, which spreads lots of seeds. An important identification feature is that it smells like garlic when it's crushed. So you can see the photo at the top of the screen is the first year rosettes before it has that tall part with flowers. And if you're not sure, that's the stage where it's more confusing to identify it perhaps, but if you crush a leaf and give it a sniff, if it smells like garlic, then it's almost certainly garlic mustard. They're also kidney shaped at that stage, and then later it's more of a heart shape in the second year growth. So the picture with the flowers, the leaves there, if you take a notice, are kind of veiny and sawtoothed and heart shaped. All right, so that's your garlic mustard primer. There's a lot more information with the links that we're sharing if you want to find out more about the details for identification. Just a quick note that there are lookalikes. So yet another reason not to just go willy-nilly kind of pulling it out, besides the fact that that could increase its spread, is that you might be pulling out the wrong species by mistake. For example, in York Regional Forest, here's a picture that has half mugwort and half garlic mustard. Just if you can take a close look there and guess which one's which. Other lookalikes the first year are with native violets, ground ivy, and with the flowers, it can be confused with dame's rocket, cutleaf toothwort, or early saxifrage. Just to be mindful. So what can you do if you came to this webinar and you're frustrated about garlic mustard and you want to really get hands-on and deal with it on your own property? There are resources for you. I would refer you to the best management practices from the Ontario Invasive Plants Council. For one thing, pulling it can spread seeds and make the infestation worse, especially as you have disruption to the soil. So repeated treatments are needed with any best management plan. You have to kind of have a long-term plan in place for going back, doing the pull again, for example, after it's regenerated. And note that seeds can last in the seed bank for 30 years. That's one of the reasons that it's so good at spreading, because it seeds after just 2 years and then the seeds are viable for a long time. It's also another interesting thing is it has like an S-shaped tap root So I was talking with one of our horticultural partners, Lynn Short, and she was letting me know how this taproot grows with right angle turns, which is the reason that if you pull it out without getting that entire root, it's so easy to regrow from the root. So I just want to emphasize what you can do is stop the spread, and the best management practices will help you prioritize if you do have a patch, how you can stop the spread first and then reverse the spread and control any population you have on your own property. It's spread by human boots and clothing and by pets. So trails are actually one of the ways that this species is spread the best, unfortunately. And that's a major issue in our forest. So let's look at a little bit of citizen science data that's already been submitted here. This is using the program called EDDMapS, or the tools called EDDMapS. The map here has reports, this is just pulled up this week, of garlic mustard as it exists in our area. And this was just anybody who came across it who wanted to flag it. They voluntarily submitted the report. And we'll talk through how you can actually do that yourself. It's a very quick process. There's an app. There's even an invasive hotline phone number, so I'll share that with you as well. And again, just what they're reporting is what they saw, maybe even just a photo. It's not necessary to have a photo if you can guess at the species ID, but it's verifiable with a photo, so that really helps. The location, the date, and the size of the infestation. And this is what it looks like. You can see a photo from the EDDMapS Ontario website there of their app. You can submit information online or download the app, and then you just have it handy with you. And as you're in the field, you can quick pull it up and say, here's what I'm seeing, and describe it a little bit to provide those details. Or if you would like, you can call the Invading Species Hotline. And I think that's a wonderful service that's available to help people report invasive species or as plants and really any invasive in Ontario. So we encourage you to do this in your community and while visiting York Regional Forest or other natural areas. What is that for? Like, why send it into an app? This has come about from a lot of different invasive species management efforts, trying to become more efficient and effective. So getting reports that are very meaningful for prioritizing management, for example. It also provides the participants with real-time tracking of invasive species occurrences. Again, not just plants, but you can see garlic mustard here is the EDDMapS terrestrial plants poster child. It provides local and international distribution maps. So if you are joining us today from outside of Ontario, thanks for participating, and note that you can participate in EDDMapS all throughout North America. There are electronic early detection reporting tools that were developed out of this. So basically the app came from a very rigorous scientific protocol that was like, what's going to be the most helpful information that people can submit. And they have a lot of tools. So you have a library of identification and management information to help you learn more about any invasive species in Ontario. Wonderful. Our invasive species reporting tools can really be used for flagging the occurrence and then providing those details to land managers with the verifiable data. So for example, this is a photo that was shared to me by York Regional Forestry staff, and it's a giant garlic mustard. This is the biggest leaf I've ever seen. And we wouldn't have that kind of comparison or information if people didn't take the time to submit information. Ontario has more than 50,000 invasive species observations. So this tool really helps to get a handle on the reports across the province. I'm going to take a minute now just to introduce Holly Campbell. We've been talking a lot about garlic mustard, but we have a few other invasive species that are more earlier in their spread in some ways and becoming issues. So with invasives, it's important to think about their major impacts and then also what we can do to help stop them and prevent their spread to new areas. So Holly Campbell has worked with EcoSpark mostly in the Changing Currents program, is very familiar with impacts of invasive species on our waterways. So we're going to look at a few species that affect York Regional Forest and York Region with aquatic plants. All right, over to you, Holly. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dana, for the introduction. So like Dana mentioned, we're going to look at just kind of two. First is going to be yellow iris. So if you're not familiar with it, it's also known as yellow flag iris. So it's an an aquatic perennial plant that's native to Europe and Western Asia and North Africa. It can be found both in our treed and open wetland areas, along water bodies, floodplains. And one thing interesting is that it's the only iris in North America whose flower is entirely yellow. So some key things when you're trying to identify this species, as you notice with the pictures that I have on the screen here, the plant has 3 drooping yellow sepals, and they have these purple brown markings inside that kind of look like smaller petals in a way that surround these smaller petals that are more upright in the plant as well too. The flowers for these species often bloom between April and July. They grow in groups of about 2 up to 10 and can reach heights of about 1 meter. The leaves are often flattened and they kind of fan out from the base of the plant there. In terms of ecological threats and what they have on aquatic ecosystems, so it was originally brought over in the early 1800s as an ornamental plant that was used in ponds and water gardens. Since then, the plant has spread through waterways and today can be found in most of our provinces, including Quebec, Nova Scotia, and many southern parts of Ontario, such as Toronto and the York region that we're focusing on today. The invasive plant can colonize areas, forming these dense stands of thick rhizome mats that displace native species. And it can also alter wetlands as well too, changing them from a wetter system to a more drier system. These plants are highly adaptable, and when the systems do change, they're able to survive in more drought conditions. So the dense rhizomes created by these plants has also been known to block water flow, impacting irrigation, and also impacting flood control ditches as well too. One of the major impacts of this plant is its threat to aquatic habitat. So as it takes over a specific area, it outcompetes those native species, reducing the habitat for our fish, our invertebrates, and other bird species that rely on that in order to survive. And in addition, if ingested by humans or animals that are grazing nearby, it can also be quite poisonous. So a few things that you can do to help prevent this spread. So Dana, if you just want to go to the next slide there for me, please. Thank you very much. Is again, learn how to identify these plants and be able to report that to EDDMapS, which Dana was talking. So here is a map that I've taken. So as you can see, the spread through the Toronto area and around the York region isn't too much, as you'll see, compared to the next species that we look at. But there could still be cases that haven't been identified yet. So we need people like yourselves and students and youth to go out and collect this information so that we can monitor that spread and see where it's happening. Other things such as if you do have this in your pond or in your garden, switch it to more of a native species to help reduce that spread. And if you are disposing of it, make sure you're disposing of it in the garbage and not the compost, because the seed heads can still spread. And now with that, we're going to take a look at Phragmites. So this one might be one that you might be a little more common with. It's known as a common reed or Phragmites australis. So there are kind of 2 different versions. There's the native and the non-native. So our invasive Phragmites, it's a perennial grass that is native to Eurasia. We can find it in wetlands, watercourses, roadside ditches, and many areas that have kind of moist to wet soils. With Phragmites, It's still kind of unclear how it made its way over to North America, but it does cause significant damage to the biodiversity, not only in aquatic systems, but also nearby terrestrial systems too, along wetlands and beaches all across Ontario. So when identifying between the native and invasive, it's there's certain features that you can see that I have on the screen here. So invasive Phragmites, it grows in extremely dense stands where you can have up to or more than 200 stems in one little area. With native Phragmites, you can kind of you'll find it more mixed among other plants there. Invasive Phrag can also reach heights up to 5 meters. And the stem of the Phragmites, it kind of ranges from beige to a tan color with blue-green leaves, and they have very dense seed heads that, as you can see in the top there, kind of look like a broom head. In comparison to the native species, the head or the flowering head there of the Phragmites, it's a lot less dense. The leaves are more of a yellowish green color, and the stems kind of take on more of a reddish brown color there. So as some of you might know, invasive Phragmites, it's a very aggressive plant. It establishes quite quickly in areas outcompeting native species for water and nutrients. It's highly adaptable and capable of going to extreme lengths, such as releasing toxins from the roots to impact the growth of nearby plants, decreasing biodiversity in different areas. Since the invasive species is able to grow more quickly than others, it can also alter aquatic ecosystems by lowering the water table, as it's able to absorb water a lot more quickly than that of native species. This can cause significant harm to our aquatic ecosystems as the lower levels and the loss of the plant diversity. It impacts those key habitats for the species, making them more vulnerable, certain fish and invertebrates, to predators and preys as well too, or completely in some cases drying up those aquatic systems that they need in order to survive. So what can you do to prevent the spread of Phragmites? So we'll just look at the distribution map. As you can see in comparison to yellow iris, there's a lot more sightings and reportings for Phragmites as it significantly spreads once it's in an area. So a few things that you can do, very similar, some of the methods that you can do with the yellow iris, is, again, learn how to identify it and report these sightings, especially not just individual plants, but larger areas where you might find Phrag as well too, so that we can get a better understanding of that impact that it has on specific areas. If you do find it in your backyard, be sure to refer to best management practices on how to properly dispose of the plant. Again, putting it in the garbage and not composting, because that seed head can still sprout and create more plants in that area. And if you're on trails and you're hiking along, make sure that you stay on those trails and you're not detouring, because the seeds can catch on to your clothing. So making sure that you clean them very well, get rid of any muds, any seed, anything like that where you are, instead of carrying that to one place or another. So now I'm going to actually pass it on to Dana, who was part of a pilot project that we did here with EcoSpark, managing Phragmites. So there you go, Dana.
Hey, thanks so much, Holly. And that was wonderful. Holly will be available for questions as well as we wrap up later. Feel free to chat with her as we go. She'll be sharing a couple of the resources that she mentioned into the chat as well. I wanted to point out, I think people are kind of hungry for some hands-on information, and citizen scientists can also be volunteers to help out with invasive plant management and removal. So one of the projects that EcoSpark has taken on with our city and academic partners, including Lynn Short at Humber Arboretum and the City of Toronto Community Stewardship Program, was an invasive Phragmites removal project. We were really looking at what is the effectiveness of training citizen science volunteers in novel Phragmites removal techniques. So that full report is available. We're going to share the link, and it's available at ecospark.ca as well. If you're curious about that kind of hands-on project. We are trying to launch new projects in the coming years. I'll say now because this summer's research has unfortunately been postponed. But we hope that you'll stay tuned to our newsletters as opportunities come up to get more involved in the research at a hands-on level. And one thing that you can really do from home is to support the native biodiversity. There's the whole point behind all of this. So I think with invasive plants, sometimes our chats can be a little bit negative, and it's like fight the good fight and all of this. But I think especially with the programs we run with students, it's important to come back to we have wonderful resources here in Ontario, and we're really excited to explore and celebrate them as we go. So native plants were established over millennia. They evolved together with indigenous wildlife. They're well adapted to local climate and soil conditions. And they're diverse, but they can form stable ecosystems. So see, these are some of the reasons that our native plants are really important to protect. And I'm sure a lot of you are well aware of that as well. Here's an image of one of our bee species, and Ontario has more than 300 native bee species alone. So you can imagine some of those have co-evolved with the native plants that were found here for millennia, and those are the relationships that are really at the foundation of our forest systems and our ecosystems in general, and that's what we're trying to protect whenever we talk about invasive species. So just a couple of ways that you can get more involved in native plants as opposed to invasive plants in your garden. Of course, we encourage you to plant native, and there are lots of great resources available even now during this health crisis. For example, the Native Plants Info and the Grow Me Instead guides are all available online. Our EcoSpark Native Pollinator Plant Seed Giveaway, which I don't know how many of you came to the webinar for your native plant seeds, but stay tuned. We have a brief survey at the end, and anyone who completes the survey while supplies last can get some pollinator seeds in your mailbox and hopefully pollinators in your yard. So I hope you'll participate in that. There are a number of local nurseries with online resources, so you can order plants. Native Plants of Claremont is one that is delivering to York Region, for example, and there are others. We can answer more specifics about that after the webinar as well if you have questions about just where to get some native plants. The Gardener's Action Plan as well is specifically about addressing invasive plants in gardens and what can gardeners do. So I hope you'll take a look at some of those. And then there's some fun projects that you can do with kids to get your native plants started. For example, if you put a little hole in the bottom of an eggshell and use your recycled egg cartons. We found that this works well with my 4-year-old. So take a look at some fun ways to get families involved in plantings. Okay, we have a citizen science project that I'd like to highlight because this is a different way that you can report anything that you see. If you're not sure if it's invasive, for example, and you just come across a neat plant, this is a tool that you can use to find out a little bit more about it, or any wildlife that you see, any wild plants. Even if it's a spider in your shower, if you're at home, you can take observations with this. It's a free tool called iNaturalist. That is a community of naturalists, now a global community, who are all sharing these reports with each other of what they're seeing and then having conversations. So the community can help you identify what it was that you were seeing. We have an EcoSpark participant observation page that we're doing weekly projects with a little journal there. So if you join our project, then we can help you tune into some local issues as you're participating in iNaturalist. I'll just tell you a little bit more about how that works. when you take a photo or share, you can even like record frog calls, share some sort of evidence of what it was that you found, then it pops up onto a map in iNaturalist. And you can also obscure the location if you find a species at risk, for example, and you're worried about sharing that publicly. You can, yeah, it was colt's foot. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing what that plant was. There, colt's foot. This was one of the first blooming ones this spring. Anyways, all of the information that goes into iNaturalist is publicly available, so you can pull up recordings. These are just some recent observations that were submitted to the iNaturalist EcoSpark project page. Just a little bit more about getting started. If you've never heard of iNaturalist before or used it, the idea is that you record what you saw when you saw it, and you can submit a photo and then where you saw it. And with iNaturalist, you do need to make an account. So I think it's ages 14 and up. However, our iNaturalist app that we recommend for families or people just getting started is called Seek. And the Seek app, you do not need an account. So if you have an iNaturalist account, you can link it. But this is a really great tool just to learn more. And again, if you're not sure if the plant that you're looking at is invasive, you can use a tool like this where you would point your phone's camera at what it is that you're looking at, and it cross-checks your images with all of the images that have been submitted to iNaturalist to provide real-time identification suggestions. So when that works, you can just see right away in your phone, but maybe I'm looking at garlic mustard, and that's a very handy tool. And then you can snap the photo if you want, and even earn badges. So like, did you see a mollusk? Did you see an insect? It's virtual, but it's very satisfying to collect those badges as you go. And then if you do link it to your iNaturalist account, you can provide information about what you're seeing and make that a citizen science observation. Now, we've had questions like, okay, is it better to submit an invasive plant to EDDMapS or to iNaturalist? I think the question is really, where are you in your citizen science journey? EDDMapS is the best because you have a little bit of additional information that it's asking for. For example, you can submit the size of the infestation. There's a field to demark that. And you're also flagging things right away as an invasive species. However, all of the iNaturalist invasive species that are reported get looked at by the team from EDDMapS, and if they're verifiable, then they'll be included in EDDMapS as well. So it's just that if you submit an invasive species to iNaturalist, you might not be capturing as much significant information that would be helpful for managers who want to understand how to control the species a little bit better. So in short, any way that you report it is great. EDDMapS is the best, and I hope you'll use the tools to explore a little bit more. All right, we're coming towards the end of our official webinar, and please stay tuned for that seed giveaway. We're going to have a little bit of time for questions as well. But just in summary, our takeaway for invasive plants is really that we want to be supporting biodiversity and promoting our native plants and wildlife. So you can report invasive species with citizen science tools like EDDMapS. Here's that phone number that I mentioned. If you would prefer to call the invading species hotline and you're just done with apps, like, I get it, you can call it in. Or if you're kind of a pencil and notebook person, you can record the observations in the field, and then when you get back, submit them on the web. We encourage you to inform communities wherever you can about invasive plants and their impacts, why it's important. I think the big why is a major question, and why it's important to stop the spread and then reduce impacted areas to the extent that we can, but especially prevent the spread to new places. I think that's hugely important. Stay on the trails, as Holly mentioned, and please keep your pets on the leash. Prevent soil disturbance as well. That's a major one because a lot of the invasive plants are more readily able to spread onto impacted soils. And follow best management practices to prevent and control infestations on private land. We can talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of how you would deal with garlic mustard on your property if people are interested in that during the question period. Finally, just support native plants and biodiversity wherever you go, including gardening with care and being aware when you're out on hikes about what it is that you're seeing. I'm going to wrap up with a few EcoSpark opportunities. Just a reminder that you'll be getting our newsletter quarterly unless you opt out, and you can follow us on social media as well for upcoming webinars. We would love your feedback about what would be of interest to you for resources and programs. We are offering materials and ideas for adult volunteers. There's the youth program that I talked about for the Greenbelt. So if you have any Greenbelt youth ambassadors in your life who would be interested, please have them contact us. But we also have resources for teachers and families in York Region and across the GTA. Finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, we are sharing our survey link in the chat. And if you complete this short survey at the end of the webinar today, there's a section where you can put your contact information if you're interested in our native pollinator blend seeds. We'd be happy to get that out to you, as well as follow-up resources if you have feedback. It's so helpful. So I'm going to ask, if you haven't yet, please just open the chat feature and you can click on the SurveyMonkey link and just have that waiting for you for whenever you close this. And it's a quick survey. I hope you can contribute that way. I do want to thank today all of the citizen science project coordinators, as well as Lynn Short, who consulted for this presentation, and York Regional Forest staff for consultation. The Regional Municipality of York and TD Friends of the Environment Foundation provided support for the webinar today. And we also are, we can't operate without donations, especially as our fee programs have been reduced. So I encourage you, if you like what you see in these free webinars, please take a minute and consider donating to EcoSpark. Finally, I'd like to thank all of the photographers for our presentation. They have shared these, including from iNaturalist, and that's a really fun way to just look at what is out today. So I hope this weekend you can get out a little bit as possible and explore some of the native species that are around while marking any invasives that you come across. This is my contact info. Holly is HOLLI at ecospark.ca if you had questions for her, especially about our stream programs. But I can also direct any correspondence to her if you email at this location. And we would love to hear from you. What it is that you are seeing, your ideas for spreading the word about invasive species and management and control. Thanks so much for joining. I'm just going to pause us here again with that survey link in the chat. And I think we'll open it up to questions. Holly's been following the chat a little bit more. So Holly, did you see any earlier questions that you want to start with here?
Honestly, I think most of them have been answered. So unless there's any new questions, I think with the help of Dana and Lynn, we've been able to answer everything.
And it's funny, there's two Danas here. Dana Laxton is our York Region Forest contact. So if you have any questions about York Regional Forest, she's available, I know, to answer that as well. If you have questions now, you can unmute yourself and ask them. We have just a couple of minutes left, so if you want to add anything to the chat, thank you so much to the experts in the group for responding to people as they had questions. I think I saw some recipes floating along in there, and I was forwarded one on social media yesterday, so I'll be sure and share that as well if people are interested in cooking up garlic mustard after using best management practices to remove it.
Oh, Dana, there's one that came through. Have municipalities in York Region been using herbicides to treat garlic mustard in parks or in forests? That came from Mike C.
Great. I will let Dana Laxton field that for York Regional Forest specifically, if you don't mind, Dana. And I know in best
Can
management.
you hear me?
Yeah, there she is. Hi, Dana.
Hi. So yes, the regional municipality of York has used some herbicides to treat garlic mustard, but very rarely. We kind of have a guideline that kind of separates the populations of plants from whether or not we use an herbicide versus if we do a manual or mechanical removal. And so because garlic mustard is so easily pulled out, it's actually preferred to just do a manual removal. The very few times that we have used herbicide for garlic mustards has been in basically a new plantation of forest where we had newly planted trees and the entire understory was garlic mustard. So it actually warranted under the forestry exemption of the Pesticide Act, we were able to use herbicide to treat garlic mustard in that instance.
Thanks, Dana. We have another question. Is there such a thing as one day a year for a public invasive species removal effort? I love that. There is Invasive Species Awareness Week, which I think is already passed. I'm just trying to remember what time of year. Holly, do you remember? It's in the spring. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Not off the top of my head, but I'll quickly search.
Thanks. Yes. So Invasive Species Awareness Week is an annual effort to kind of pull people together, but there's very active communities addressing invasive species in Ontario, including the Ontario Invasive Species Council. OISP, that sounds right. And some of the links that we're sharing will give you more information about them. It's a great idea to have a one-day effort. One of the citizen science initiatives that we're looking at would be to do some hands-on invasive species removal with various partners where we have that training in place and could have a plan in place to return because a lot of invasive species, as we know, when we pull them, we have to go back and make sure that they're not coming back in earnest. Yes, this week. Beautiful. Thank you. I should have known that. Invasive Species Awareness Week. Okay, so we'll be sure and share some information about that. And there you go, tunnel vision for you at its best. Thanks so much for sharing that in the chat. Do we have any other questions? Okay. As we have a few more minutes, thank you all so much for joining. If you're kind of dorky like me and into the citizen science projects, I'm going to just tell you about one more. So feel free and tap out now if you have a chance to fill out your survey. Oh, good. We can get to this question in just 1 second. If you haven't had a chance to do the survey, please complete it now, and we will be sharing these slides and details from the presentation. I think we'll get to these questions first, and then if people want to know about Bumble Bee Watch, I can chat about that as well. What other invasive species are there other than yellow iris, garlic mustard, and Phragmites, I think? And what about Scotch thistle? Right, so Ontario, I think EDDMapS is really the best overview of the invasive plants and the other invasive species. For example, there's insects, emerald ash borer is one that you might have heard about in the news. And the list is quite long. So we chose a few today that we thought were important this time of year and with York Regional Forests and just preventing in our neighborhoods. I think dog strangling vine is probably another one that you would be interested in looking up. If you have never heard about dog strangling vine, that's a really fascinating growth form and something that's a major issue. So hopefully we can have another webinar and look at detail and more projects.
Dana, I just put a link in the chat box there to the Ontario Invasive Species Awareness Program. There they have a list and they break it down into aquatic, terrestrial plants, and then other insects as well too. So if you're interested, feel free to check that link out as well too.
Thanks so much.
think we've got a few more here as well too. So garlic mustard, we just dig it out. They don't have to worry about getting the roots. So if you maybe want to talk a little bit more about the extraction process on removing garlic mustard, if you have a second.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you didn't get a chance, I'll just go back to the slide where we can see its growth form. Really what you're thinking about with garlic mustard is think like a plant a little bit with it. So how is it able to spread so well, and how can it come back? If you're interested in removing it from your property, there are a few different recommendations. One is to put in a best management practice where you're trying to approach it with more than one technique. So if you just have a few plants, you can see if pulling it works, but then you'll have to go back and pull again if it comes back. And remember that there are seeds in the seed bank. So especially if you're only pulling up, in this picture you can see the flowery part. If you're only pulling that up, then it can actually make more light available for the rosettes in the top of this slide to grow back and seed in the following year with more vigor. So you have to kind of think holistically about how you're going to remove it. Another technique that you can use is this time of year before it goes to seed to clip off the flowers. But again, if you clip off the flowers, you have to be committed to doing that throughout the season because the flowers will grow back. So you have to do it again and again, and that will reduce seeding over time if you stick with it. If you dig it out, make sure you get the full tap root, and be mindful of disrupting the soil as you do that. I think that was all of the question for, if you can't get all of the immature plants, it's still better to do something about your infestation. The best management practices will help you prioritize. For example, it's better to sort of start on the edges and work your way in if you have a large infestation, and to catch any satellite plots that are coming up a little bit further from the main source to help stop the spread. But it can help you kind of not be overwhelmed by the whole process and take steps to remove it. I have a question about...
There's two questions on there. There's one about what does it mean by seed bank, if you want to talk to that quickly. And
oh, absolutely, yeah. All we mean for a seed bank is whenever a seed falls into the soil, then it's become part of the seed bank. So that's the seeds that we grow from what's existing on the forest floor. It's like after these white flowers turn into seed pods, then those will fall down to the floor, and that becomes the seed bank for garlic mustard. And there are also native wildflower seeds in the seed bank in our natural areas. So we want to encourage those to be the ones that can regenerate.
And then there was just one other one about how common is giant hogweed?
I don't know that, how common it has become. I know it's an issue plant. A plant come up behind our neighbor, and it's huge as well as dangerous. Some of the invasive plants are really impressive in their growth form. So I would recommend that you look that one up with EDDMapS to find out a little bit more. Or if anybody else knows some more information about hogweed, they can share that. We have just a couple more minutes here. I also have a question about poison oak and poison ivy, and are they native species? So I think that's a great question. It's really an important distinction that the invasive species definition has two parts, and it has to be a non-native species, so introduced from another geographic region, and it has to be harmful. Although people might think of poison ivy as being harmful, it's actually a native part of our ecosystem here, and it's not a problem plant in the sense of taking over or replacing native species. So with invasives, we're really looking at those two pieces where it's introduced and it's negative. It has negative impacts. Any other questions here?
If you have a moment, someone, Ron was wondering what's worse, dog strangling vine or garlic mustard?
Ooh, I don't know. I feel like we should have sort of a competition one-to-one. I don't know which one is prioritized in management at this point. I think they're sort of different. if Lynn Short wants to answer that in the chat, feel free. Dog strangling vine is a different form. So you can pull it out, but it keeps twining around, and there's little bits that it can regrow from. Whereas garlic mustard is an herb, and it spreads by seed very rapidly, very readily. So that's one of the issues with garlic mustard. Yeah, it's a good question. Which one's worse? DMV has no redeeming quality. At least garlic mustard tastes good. There you go. Nutritional value.
DSV stands for dog strangling vine, just for those that are unsure. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks so much, Holly. Yeah, so this is great. I love that we're having some conversations. I'd encourage you to continue the conversations. Contact us if you have specific questions, and we'll try and follow up with everybody. And then hopefully we can have another webinar and address some of these other important species. Sorry for scrolling, going back to the contact here. There we are. Oh yeah, and a good point, the dog strangling vine is bad news for monarch butterflies. He's referring there to the butterflies mistakenly lay their eggs on dog strangling vine because it's in the milkweed family or related to it, and the caterpillars can't actually use the dog strangling vine to grow, so that's harmful for monarchs for sure. Wonderful. Are there any native insects that would eat dog strangling vine or garlic mustard? I was looking into the garlic mustard control. So there have been studies that were looking at weevils as a biocontrol, but you have to really make sure that if there's any sort of new species released, that it's not going to cause problems as well, which is why that research can take so long and be so intensive, to make sure that we're not harming the environment more by trying to control. But that's fascinating science, so I'd recommend that you take a look at some of those control species that they're considering. Okay, I think I'd better leave it at that. We're at 3 o'clock here, and I want to make sure everyone has time to get outside and do a little bit of citizen science reporting. So thanks so much for joining, and we hope that you join us again.